how and why people should take action on election security. So just quickly, the Secure Our Vote Coalition, for those folks who are new, is working to get paper ballots, paper records for every vote cast, marked by hand by many people, and for those who need assistance with a ballot marking device, and then having that paper ballot scanned. And then checking that scanned machine count against the paper after the election, but before it's certified, to make sure that that machine didn't have an error, wasn't hacked, had no problems, that that vote count is right. Those are key steps we can take to make sure that our votes are counted. And then you may have seen in last week's primary, one of the unfortunate headlines that 118,000 people were left off the voter rolls in Los Angeles in their primary. And that gets to a third piece that we're also paying attention to, which is making sure that we secure our voter registration and database systems and our election offices in general. So I'll be talking a little bit about that because that's something that everyone can work on. Los Angeles has total champions in terms of folks who want to get voters voting, want to make sure those rights are protected, super high level of knowledge about security, and just like really on top of it. So we don't really know what happened, why people were left off the rolls who had been on them for a long time, but it seems like it was probably an error somewhere in there, but we don't want to see something like that happen on a bigger scale on election day in the general. And that did seem to be an area that hackers were unfortunately really interested in, disrupting our voter registration system. So we'll be talking a little bit about materials that you can bring to your election officials no matter where you live to help them, if they haven't already, take key steps to protect those voter rolls, because those systems do need to be online. It's important that they're online, but there are things that everybody can do to make them more secure and to back them up. And Edgardo can probably speak a little bit to how to create recovery systems should they have a problem. So there's a lot of other news going on, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about election security and Secure Our Vote for those who are new. So we exist as a coalition because election security matters to every voter. Our most fundamental democratic right is under attack by hackers. It's also undermined by computer errors and, unfortunately, falling public confidence should there be a problem, right? We want everyone to get out and vote, and we have to make sure that their votes are counted correctly so that they keep getting out to vote. But we can't secure the vote as much as we'd like without hardworking activists like you. And the reason is there are a ton of election jurisdictions in the United States. There's over 9,000 local election jurisdictions where there's different officials managing the election system. So this is a political issue. They need your support in order to get the money they need to secure the vote. Whenever there's money, it becomes political. It's not partisan, which is awesome. It means that people from all different political stripes can get involved, but it does mean that you've got to get someone to say, I'm going to give you this money for election security instead of spending it on something else. So thank you for being here. We need you to secure the vote. We really appreciate you taking the time. So just in the past webinars, we've talked about the federal funding that's available that's now been distributed to a bunch of states. Other states are filing their plans about what they're going to use that money for. You can go to eac.gov, eac.gov, and I'll type that in the chat panel too to see if your state already has their plans in on what they're going to do with that money. It's not public yet, but another thing that you can do to just energize and talk to people about election security in your area is talk about this money coming in and try to find out what it's going to be spent on. So there is some funding, but it's not, unfortunately, enough. And also, we need to just make sure that it's being spent in a good way. So the more that the public's engaged in the conversation, the harder it probably is for vendors to sell something like the machine that looks like a little suitcase in the picture, which is a direct recording electronic machine that has no paper, as opposed to machines like you see that look more like scanners, where you see a paper ballot feeding in. Those are the kinds of machines we want people to use this federal money for. Not those particular brands, we should say, but just scanners of paper. So the first step is to figure out where, what priority you have for your state. So here's a map. It's a simplified version of Verified Voting's wonderful map of who has paper ballots, who has direct recording, electronic, aka paperless systems. And you'll see the states in red do not have paper ballots that are useful for a recount right now. And the states in yellow have some counties that don't have paper ballots. And that goes from, Wisconsin, which has almost all paper ballots, to Pennsylvania or Texas, which has many, many, many counties that do not have any paper. So check out Verified Voting's website to learn more at the county level, but this gives you a sense of, is your priority to get paper ballots? Or if you're in a state with green, then your priority is probably around audits and registration security instead. So if you're in one of those, you're in one of those green states, you're probably going to look at audits or registration systems, and we want to pull who we have on the call here. What is the top election security priority for your county and state? What are you planning to advocate for? So just click on the option that is best for you. Do we have a result? All right. Wow. So most of you do need to get paper ballots. That is really important because there's no way to recover without that paper. So we'll keep that in mind. 26% of you need stronger audits, and then a smaller percentage need to work on securing election offices and voter rolls. Thanks so much. That's really helpful. So we want you to take action, meet with your local election officials. We want you to build a good relationship with them, and there's a lot of tools on Secure Our Vote focused on that, and that's what I'm going to dig into shortly. But go to a Board of Elections meeting, or what it's equivalently called in your area, or set up a meeting with them, and really be thoughtful about that meeting in terms of making it a positive, supportive conversation. If you aren't able to go to a meeting, you can also email and call your election officials and have a conversation that way. And then you want to just prepare for that meeting. Think about what their full-time job is. If you're in a rural area, it's probably more than elections. What do you want to get out of the meeting, and what might the next steps be for after the meeting? So if your next step is you really are hoping that they'll get a paper system and their problem is funding, maybe you want to go to your county commissioners or your county executive, ask for that funding. Maybe you want to go to the state government. Maybe you want to tell them you're going to talk to them next week after you've had those conversations, but plan on some kind of follow-up step. So here are some of the materials we want you to consider bringing. No matter where you are, election officials are needing to tighten security around their voter registration databases and just their offices in general. So there's 3 actions that the Government Coordinating Committee on Election Security is recommending for literally every election official in the country. And they may already know about this, but you can find this on Secure Our Vote under the resources page, and we'll also send it out to you after this call. They can join the Center for Internet Security, and they get free updates if they're election officials on security on a regular basis. And that's just to it'll keep it on their radar, but also make them aware right away if there's some vulnerability in their software that they might need to correct. And then second, the Department of Homeland Security has regional teams that will do a vulnerability scan or a cyber hygiene scan for election officials. And they'll also do a phishing campaign assessment. So they'll test an election office to see if they're vulnerable to opening a virus that could infect their computers and potentially affect the election. And some states have great resources like this at the state level, but one way or the other, they should be thinking about these kinds of things. These are free resources. They want to get in the line with the Department of Homeland Security so that they have time to get these assessments done before the election. So you can bring this with you and send them the link, and hopefully that's helpful to them. The second thing is we have a pricing report on the cost of new scanning machines. So I'm going to go to Secure Our Vote here if I can find it. Sorry, too many things open. Supporting Common Cause, yay! So there's a pricing report, because what we see is that sometimes machine vendors are going to charge a lot more to one county than they would to another, and I think that that's based on how hard the counties negotiate, and they also need to look pretty hard at the contracts they're signing for hidden costs around maintenance and warranties and things like that. So if you bring something like a pricing report, you're showing that you care about their interest, right? They have tight budgets, they have to keep balanced. So if you go to the resources page of Secure Our Vote,
we can't see your screen, sorry.
Oh no.
Okay, if you go to share screen, then choose a different application.
Oh, okay. Thank you for letting me know that.
Sorry, thought it was working.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so now you should be able to see the Secure Our Vote resources page. You get here by going to secureourvote.us. If you're not on the webinar, if you're calling in, and then click on Learn More and then Resources. And under More Secure Voting Machines, there's the new voting machine pricing report. So if you're in that majority of folks that are looking at getting new machines, you want to bring this with you to show that you're interested in helping them save money on new machines. You're not necessarily pushing them in one direction or another, but just you've got their back and you're thinking about their tight budgets. There's a lot of other resources on here. Just quickly, a couple others. Under Securing Voter Rolls and Election Infrastructure, that's the piece that we were talking about a few minutes ago, the top 3 things they need to do. And then there's this great new toolkit that Brennan Center and Common Cause, as well as Verified Voting and the National Election Defense Coalition, put together for you as an advocate and for election officials to understand audits better, to understand machine purchases, all of those things. So that's right at the top of the resources page. So we really encourage you to check those out. And I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint. We're almost done here. Okay, so bring some materials with you. Here's the sign up for election officials to get regular updates on security. And then you follow up, you send them a thank you send them what you promised, you sign up to be a poll worker. So we have a quick poll. How will you reach out to your election officials? A couple more seconds to get your response. All right, so 22% of you will be meeting with your election officials at their board meeting. 17% will be setting up a meeting individually. 22% of you will be calling And wow, 33% of you are already speaking regularly to your local election officials. That's so awesome. We are so proud of you. Wow. Okay. We are thrilled to read that. So we are going to tailor more of this presentation in future presentations to you all who are already doing this great work. Thank you. So that wraps up my piece. I'm going to turn it back over to Izzy to have us hand it over to Edgardo.
Yeah, I will do that very quickly, but handing it over to Edgardo to lead us through the primary focus of our presentation today. I just want to encourage you all, if there are questions that come up while Edgardo is speaking, please put them in the chat panel. We will get them all at the end. But we definitely want you to be thinking about the questions that you have that will be useful for you as you go through this. So please put them in the chat box right there. Thanks so much.
All right. Okay. I'm trying to make sure I have the screen shared. So thank you for inviting me to be with you tonight. I'm Edgardo Cortez. I'm the former commissioner of elections in Virginia. I've also in the past have served as a local election official running elections in Fairfax County, Virginia, as well as doing some work with advocacy groups around rights restoration, and have worked at the EAC previously. So I've kind of worked at the different levels of elections. And now I'm working, as Izzy mentioned, with the Brennan Center as an election security advisor. And so I want to talk, I think tonight, to kind of walk you guys through how we transitioned equipment in Virginia and what our process was. Starting back in 2014, and I don't know if you're able to see the screen or not. The map, okay. And so starting in 2014, this was what we had when we walked in the door under Governor McAuliffe's administration, was a primarily DRE state, right? And the ones that had paper-based systems had fairly recently transitioned over. So there were a lot of DREs in use in the state. In the 2014 election, we had some significant problems in Virginia Beach, actually, on election day. As a federal election, and based on the issues we had, we conducted a review of the complaints that we had received about voting equipment issues in the 2014 election. We actually worked with what's now one of the certified test labs that certified by the EAC, and they came and helped us, review all of to figure out what we should review more, what sounded kind of like routine things that happen, and where there appear to be other issues. That actually led us to not Virginia Beach, but to some other locals that were using equipment called the WinVote, which, based upon our testing, we actually found was providing a wireless transmission while the polls were open. There's a legislative ban. There's legislation on the books in Virginia that disallows wireless communication with voting systems while voting is going on. And so what we found was these machines were actually transmitting a signal during the day. And so the problems that were reported with that equipment was it was trying to connect to, or people's mobile devices were trying to connect with these voting machines, and it kept causing them to crash as these things were going on. And so we took that, we did some testing with our statewide IT agency, VITA, and we just determined that this was, they took it, and knowing that wireless signal was up, and they were actually able to very quickly get into that system remotely and impact vote totals in a test election. And so obviously that for us was a huge red flag. We immediately moved to decertify the win votes. That was approximately 60 days out from a primary election. And it covered about it covered about 20% of the precincts in the state were using win votes at the time. And so we decertified the equipment. Folks made a quick transition. We, in advance of decertifying the equipment, actually reached out to voting equipment vendors to ensure that they had sufficient equipment on hand and staffing and resources to help localities transfer quickly, that they would be able to print ballots since we were so close to an election. We worked with the election officials to figure out, how to, it was towards the tail end of a fiscal year, how to pay for it, how to, do the transition, how to prepare for printing paper ballots. We had a very successful primary election, and we actually had none of those locals reported a voting equipment problem during that election. And so following that, in the 2015, or right around that time, the 2015 session, Governor McAuliffe had asked for state funding to transition everybody statewide. The legislature opted not to provide that, and so made it a local responsibility, which I'm sure many of you out there are dealing with, your local governments having to pay the full cost of new voting equipment. And so, we kept encouraging people to transition to paper and to make a quick move to paper. But what we, because of the lack of state funding, what we ended up getting as we moved on heading into the presidential election, you can see this next map. We did have a lot of people transition over. Again, about 20% of the precincts in the state were win votes, and that equipment was decertified. And then we had other people that saw that and opted to move to new paper-based systems. You can see, I don't know how familiar folks are with Virginia, but we have, some are more rural areas, especially in the Southwest part of the state, have a lot of economic challenges, really don't have financial resources. You can see what we were ending up with was a situation where our voters in the more rural parts of the state, poorer localities, were having a really different voting experience because they were voting on equipment that was prone to failure and was having all these issues. Meanwhile, the rest of the state was moving on to paper-based systems. So we got through 2016. 2017, Virginia has off-year elections, so we had a gubernatorial race on the ballot, as well as our other statewide offices. And so we found out in the summer of 2017 that DEF CON, which is an annual hacker conference, was putting together what they called a voting village, which is they basically would have voting equipment on hand for people to try to hack into and figure out, if there were any vulnerabilities. The reporting that came out of that, DEF CON, was really disturbing to us. I remember that we got I received a message from our CIO at the agency, basically telling me that the password for one of the voting machines that was still in use in Virginia had been posted online, made available during the DEF CON event. And so we moved quickly. Again, given the lessons we'd learned with WinVote, we worked with our statewide IT agency, and our focus was really on testing what vulnerabilities the equipment had that could be easily accessed. What things could happen in a real election scenario. Obviously, if you have unfettered access to equipment, there's a lot of stuff you can do. But what can you do if there's, if you're in an election scenario? And the conclusion that we reached, let me give you one last map here, which is kind of what the state of play was at that point. So this is again in August of 2017. Poorer, more rural localities using DREs. And so we looked at, again, what are the vulnerabilities of the equipment. I think in working with the IT agency and working through that process, we reached the conclusion in Virginia that for us there was no way to tell if the machines had been improperly accessed or tampered with. And I think more problematic to us was even if you knew about it, there's no way to recover, right? It's a paperless system. It's all digital. It's all electronic. There's no way to recover. If you have a failure, even if it's not an intentional thing, if you just have a voting machine that fails, you have a memory card inside that just fails, you have some other issue, and you lose votes, you can't fix that. You can't get them back. You can't recover from that. And so, for us heading into a statewide, major statewide election with all sorts of national attention, for us, it was the first time that as an election official, I'd been in a position where I wouldn't have been comfortable the next day after an election if there were a question about the machines. I would not have been comfortable going out and saying, yes, we're sure that the results on these machines are accurate. We are comfortable with it. We know, there may have been X, Y, or Z issue, but we have confidence in that process. And I wasn't able to do that. And I don't think anybody else at the state was able to do that too. And so that's really what led to the decertification. That was kind of the critical piece, because if anybody had been able to say, yes, I'm comfortable with that, we can explain that, sure, we should switch, but there's, other considerations here, that have been one thing. Rather than no one, either at the department or with our state board of elections, our state IT agency, was willing to be in that position. And so, we transitioned. We had about 30 jurisdictions that, again, had about 2 months prior to the November general election to transition. It was about 2 weeks before the start of absentee voting. And so we made that switch, and I think our process worked a lot, the same way we did it first, which is we had communication with the jurisdictions using the equipment to make sure they knew that we were reviewing it and what they may have to do before November. We also were in touch with the vendors to, again, make sure they had sufficient equipment on hand and enough resources to help transition people over. I think when it comes to the vendor, we also focused on, on making sure that people were able to pay for the equipment. So we were able to get the vendors to provide, removal of the old voting equipment, disposal of that equipment, so that the locals wouldn't have to worry about that in such a short time frame. Several of the vendors offered extended financing options for localities. We had one vendor, we have people that got new equipment back in November, and their first payments for that equipment isn't going to be until this coming July 1st, because they offered to hold payments until the beginning of the next fiscal year. So a lot of that kind of creative work with everybody, with all the stakeholders, to figure out how to transition quickly, how to make this happen. So that's kind of the process we went through in Virginia, to get to the decertification. And so, Izzy, I don't know if there's any additional that you have, or kind of want to start taking questions at this point. Just let me know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that covers a lot of the questions that I know I had. We did get a couple of other questions in, both some about what you're talking about, but also a few a little bit unrelated ones about some of the other work that's happening both in Virginia and across the country. So I'm going to start asking those, but if folks have other questions that they want to make sure we hear from Edgardo on, then please put them in the chat. So the first question is, how do you recommend we most effectively get a statewide audit policy in a state like Virginia? Who are the best lobbying points for that? Who are the best points of contact? If an activist is serious about getting a statewide audit policy, who do you recommend and how do you recommend kind of starting that process? And that's a bigger question than what you're talking about.
So I think, in Virginia, there's kind of a move right now to look at the legislature has passed an audit policy. It's not a great audit policy. It doesn't happen until after certification of the vote. I think the key, not just in Virginia, but everywhere else, is to get people moving in the right direction. I mean, some people are a lot further off from being able to conduct really good, meaningful post-election audits. And so I think the key is, moving the ball forward, whether it's starting with pilots in some of the jurisdictions to show people this is how an audit would be conducted in this state under the rules that we have. Everybody looks right now to Colorado, which they've been doing some great work out there around risk limiting audits. But Colorado's voting processes are really different than Virginia and then a lot of other states. And so, if a statewide mandate for post-election audits is getting nowhere, is getting no traction, let's find some local officials who are willing to take this on and maybe work with them in the state to do pilots and say, okay, this is how it would look. That will then give them a sense for how much resource will be required long term when you do statewide mandate. And that may be something too that legislators who are interested in this, they may not be able to get a full state requirement for post-election audits, but they may be able to get in a bill that has them do a pilot, has the state do a pilot and report back to the legislature. So that's one way that folks can, I think, kind of get in the door and get the process moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think there's definitely a lot of work being done to try to move states to do pilots on audits this year. I can check on that in Virginia, but I do know there is movement happening in dozens of states to try to get small scale pilots off the ground to test it out and show that it works. The next question is, when in 2017, was there resistance from Virginia election officials to changing voting systems in the months before the November election? What were the complaints you saw? Who were they from? And how did you overcome that negativity?
Certainly, it was not a super popular decision among officials. It wasn't in 2015 either. And I mean, I'm a former local election official. I mean, I understand it. Having to transition and get new equipment in 2 weeks before you start absentee voting, when you have to get ballots, you have to figure out how the equipment works, make a selection, but you also have to train, potentially hundreds or maybe thousands, depending on your size, of poll workers and people that use the process, do voter education. It is a big lift. It's a lot. I think for us, the work with the locals was keeping them informed throughout the process, right? So that was key in terms of dealing with some of that pushback, and also explaining to them. We allowed the locals to come into. There was information that the state didn't publish. This equipment's in use in other states, right? We were very cognizant of that, and so we didn't put all of our information kind of out there in the public. We did share it with other states that had the equipment, right? But if we found out about a vulnerability, you don't want to, from our view, we didn't want to publicize that and say, hey, these people are using this equipment, and here's how you can potentially disrupt it. But I think giving the local officials that sort of information so they understood exactly where we had the concerns and what our concerns were, and also just the...
You're cutting out a little bit there, Edgardo.
assistance in helping them transition, partnering them up with other locals that had already transitioned. That's the sort of work that we did with our local officials heading into that, to at least ease the transition a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's important for all of us, making sure we're talking to, or no matter what we're doing, talking to the local folks first, making sure that we can get them on board is always good. Were you able to help the counties get a good deal on the machines? What kind of things did you do with the vendors? What kind of things did the vendors do in the negotiating that you wish they hadn't in terms of the contracts with the counties? Their next question.
We weren't able to get involved in the contracting process directly, but again, the work we did with the vendors was number one, to kind of, when we started the review process, to say, hey, we're reviewing this equipment. This is what may come out of that. Are you all prepared to help our locals get this done? Right. And so we kind of put them front and center, letting them know, like, this was a priority for us at the state. And they, and also talking with them. I think for us, the big thing was pushing the vendors to understand and provide good options for kind of creative financing for equipment. Right. We knew there wasn't state funding available because we tried that. We had tried that before, and so it unfortunately fell to the local governments to do. And so our big push at the state was, how can you help these folks get the equipment in, and then figure out, how do they pay for it? So I think that was our focus in getting it in. We were, we already had equipment we already had paper-based equipment that was certified for use in the state. So we didn't have to go through and certify equipment before doing this. We already had new scanning equipment that had gone through certification, was new digital scanning equipment, and what was available. So we didn't have that obstacle to overcome.
Thanks. Another question on vendors was, sorry, I just lost it. There it is. Cool. If you want to share what company your state bought from, did you buy from, I think you already discussed this, but one vendor or multiple vendors? And I think the question that I've been hearing more generally is, and I think Katie can answer this a little bit as well, but how can we find out more about the vendors that have been options in our states? You've covered this a little bit.
So can you still hear me? I'm having some video issues here, but are you able to still hear me?
Yeah,
a little bit crackly, but we can hear you.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened. We tried it earlier and everything was working fine. So I think, in terms of Virginia, we have 4 systems that were already certified. So there was an ES&S system, Dominion, Hart, and then Unison. And so it's kind of the 4 major vendors all had systems certified. Virginia law allows the locals to make the decision. So they basically are allowed to pick from any state certified system. And so there were 4 systems available, and each of the 4 vendors kind of got some contracts out of the, and set up equipment there. So it did help that we had multiple vendors that people could choose from.
Thank you. I think that's
we also, on Secure Our Vote, we have under that same resources page that I was showing you before, I can share screen quick to it. We have a link, a set of links for every state of what's certified right now. And depending on where you are, like if you're in Pennsylvania, they're rushing to certify a bunch of different machines. They only have one. But it's under resources, more secure voting machines, what machines are certified in my state. So check that out. If you don't know, sometimes it's a little buried or hard, but we called through and we have as much as we could get from your states. If you don't see it, we would love your help in getting it.
Yeah, Katie, if you could post those links as well in the chat, that'd be lovely.
Okay.
Cool. And Edgardo, we'll be back on video for two more questions that we have. We're going to try to get through quickly so we can make sure we have enough time to talk a little bit more about how our next steps for everybody. So the next question is that this person's county chooses 2 precincts at random, quote unquote, random, to audit. I've asked how they select at random, but nobody can tell me exactly how they choose. Not even the Board of Elections chair knows. This person has read that choosing at random needs to be based on something not predictable, like stock market at closing bell. It is something that should be pursued. What does random mean in terms of our audits?
I mean, when it comes to audits, that's a little bit tricky, right? You have places like Colorado that have software that is used to kind of randomize the selection of what ballots they're gonna check, what ballots they're gonna audit, and so there's kind of a lot of different options in terms of choosing precincts. I imagine I actually can't imagine what it is they're using to randomize that. They may assign them numbers, and we had the unfortunate situation where we had to pick a winner out of a bowl. Pick a winner's name out of a bowl, and so there's all sorts of things when you talk about random that go on in election. But I think ideally. They'll get some sort of process, like I said, like Colorado, where they're doing some randomized program. So it is truly random, and you can select those things without the kind of biases that the election officials might have for, we heard there might be issues in this precinct, so that ended up on our random list, those sorts of things.
Yes. And I think that there have been some standards released of, even in the non-Colorado models, of the different ways that you can do the randomization. I think there was a great, I can look into it as I can, I think there was a series of good options of what the random options could be that might not just be pulling out of a hat. But if folks haven't seen the video of the photo canister in the election last year, that's a pretty great one in general. Okay, I think we have one really quick question, which is just, does the Secretary of State of Virginia require the retention of digital ballot images captured in the scanners for auditing purposes?
So fun fact, our Secretary of State has nothing to do with elections in Virginia. And so as Commissioner, I was the chief election official, but we don't have anything on the books right now that requires those to be kept and maintained for auditing purposes. I think that is one of the things that the state is looking at this year. Required to do some audits this year, and I assume this will come up as part of the conversation to look at any additional legislative changes that need to go on, to facilitate better audits down the line. But at this point, it's not a requirement.
Absolutely. And I think the last question is just, where did that go? Figuring out how to figure out where in the process your state is. I know this is a question we get all the time, is how do I figure out where the process, both my state is at, but also my county is at, so I know the appropriate intervention points. Akane, I think some of the toolkits that you've outlined have that, but if there's any other tips or tricks, if those aren't live on the website, what would those be?
I think the biggest thing in figuring out where they are is to ask, right? Is to actually engage the election officials and ask that question. For the most part, election officials are going to be very willing to talk to you about kind of where they are in that process and what obstacles there may be to them getting new equipment. And so I think that is something in approaching election officials. My experience has always been both on the advocacy side, but certainly on the election side, right? People are going to be more open and willing to talk to you if it's not if your initial interaction with them is not adversarial, right? If you go in remembering that this is their job, they have a job to do,
and they're doing the best they can with the resources they have, and kind of coming at it from, this is information you'd like to know to figure out how to make the process better, right? And so I think coming at it from that kind of cooperative framework and really trying to work with folks is going to get you a lot better reception with everybody, but certainly with election officials, than a very adversarial approach. But in terms of where your county is or where your state is, ask those questions, because they're really important things to know, and really the only ones that can answer them are the election officials.
Thank you very much, and I completely agree. Emily, who had asked the question originally, has a follow-up, which is that Emily wants to know if they're not looking at one county, they want to figure out nationally, because they do work with multiple states. There's a resource or a place, I think, that is tracking that process at more of a macro scale.
Yeah, I think some of the resources that Akini has been posting during the chat are available. They're available there. I mean, there's in addition to the coalition website, there's Brennan Center has information out there, verified voting. There's all sorts of groups, but they're all there's a lot of good info that Akini has put forward on the different links. So kind of getting that sense. That map at the beginning of that PowerPoint kind of summed up where people are generally when it comes to voting equipment, and those states that are in red that don't have that aren't using any paper or any ability to audit. I think with the exception of Delaware, most of them aren't going to have new equipment or ways to audit anytime soon, right? They're not really, there's been some discussions in those states, but nothing really seems to be gaining traction. Delaware is transitioning to new equipment, all paper-based, so they're going to, they're going to come off that list fairly soon, but the rest of them, there's been discussions, but not a lot of movement.
And I can speak to some of that with New Jersey and Pennsylvania as we wrap up here. But yeah, we have, I think, verified voting is trying to track this as much as possible. We're trying to track certain pieces of it, like what's certified and who's switching to paper ballots. Verified voting knows, some counties that are trialing out risk limiting audits, and Common Cause knows of some others, but that's a lot of research, as you've probably ascertained yourself, and as much as everyone can do that outreach and share that information, the better off I think we'll all be. But there's just too many election jurisdictions for any of our relatively small organizations to have all that info.
Absolutely. I think that was the last big question we had. So, Akini, I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, you now, because we talked a little.
Yeah, just quick. So there's some states where there doesn't seem to be a lot of movement, as Edgardo was saying, for the next election, particular South Carolina and Georgia. Louisiana, there seems to be a little bit more of a conversation movement in the right direction. Pennsylvania has ordered that all of their counties have to move to paper by the 2020 election, and it's hinted that they may decertify in recent media reports after that. So that's good, but they're struggling with some of the same funding issues that everybody is. There's no money in the state budget right now. That's being hashed out at the last minute by the end of this month. But there's great citizen activists working on that around the state. So fingers crossed, certainly wealthier counties are looking at changing, and there are some counties that can afford to do it right away. And hopefully folks like you are advocating in those counties to make sure they make a choice they won't regret. We have seen in the absence of activists like you, like in Texas, I think 30 some counties since 2016 have changed to new machines in their DREs. So 11 counties changed to paper. And it's because there weren't people talking to them about the choices, and the coverage has suggested that the election officials weren't aware. that folks were moving to paper in other places. So this advocacy, that super basic, friendly conversation where the international standard of paper ballots is mentioned in a kind way periodically, is really, really important. In New Jersey, we're active. The Brennan Center for Justice is active, and a bunch of other groups are active in trying to find funding for at least a few counties to turn over to paper. Again, there's a huge budget fight. There's, a state budget fight that's like in the headlines talking about shutting down the New Jersey government. So it's not a great time to find money. But there is, again, this federal money that Pennsylvania is putting all towards paper, and we're encouraging a chunk of that money to be spent on paper in New Jersey as well. So we're working on that, and there's some great bills moving there. And there's also fantastic activists like Anne Ray. Izzy, I don't know if you can make her a panelist, who has been meeting with her election officials and is available to answer questions about how to do that. And I would just say, I know there's some people on the call who have been working on this for a really long time and maybe don't all have great relationships with their election officials. Just the truth of the matter. You might want to try to find other messengers who can kind of start fresh. And Anne has been able to start fresh with some of her election officials who may have, heard from other folks in the movement before. And so, Anne, I don't know if you have a few thoughts to share on that, or if we want to just take questions. It's fine either way. There you are.
And I just unmuted you.
Oh, I can't hear her though.
And we can't hear you. If your microphone might not be plugged in, or maybe try calling. While we figure out this technical situation, I'm going to launch a quick poll of what you all can do to spread the word. As Kenny said, we need a lot more people around the country doing this work, and we'll keep testing Anne's audio while we launch this. So what are you going to do to spread the word about the need to secure a vote to other places and other people in your communities, all around the country? Anne, let me know if your audio, want to keep testing? No. And I'm sending you the phone number if you want to try calling in.
For folks on the phone, the options for how you're going to spread the word about the need to secure a vote are emailing your friends and telling them why this is so important, presenting about election security in an upcoming organizational meeting, and you can use videos from Secure Our Vote to help with that, writing a letter to the editor, collecting petition signatures. On the resources page, we also have a petition you can print out and collect signatures to grow the number of people who understand that we can fix this problem, but we need their help. Posting on Facebook and posting on Twitter, and we're going to share some ways you can do these things after the call.
Yep. I'm going to share these results right now. Thank you all. It looks like a lot of folks are going to do multiple things, which is great. I'll read these out a little bit while I think Anne's calling in right now. And Anne, just let us know once you've called in. Oh, nope. Okay, but I'm going to find her number. Kenny, can you read the results in, and I will promote her? You are muted now, Kenny. Kenny, you're muted. Kenny, you're muted. Okay.
I just realized I've been muted for the last. Apologies. Very shortly, and I know we're running out of time here as well. Pretty much everyone's going to post on Facebook. More than half of you are going to email your friends. You're going to present at an upcoming organizational meeting, and you're going to post on Twitter. And then 35% of you are going to write a letter to the editor. Recommend 5 sentences for that to keep it short and increase your chances of getting published. There's been some great coverage of the Judiciary Committee hearings today on election security. That's a great hook if your local paper covered it. To write a letter tonight and try to get it published in the next couple days. Usually you need to respond within 24 hours or within 5 ideally to get published in a daily. And then 29% of you are going to collect petition signatures, which you can use to grow your local group if you have one or start one. And then if you can send those into Secure Our Vote, we can get those folks educated about what they can do that way too. Thanks so much. Do we have Ann on yet? Okay, I think we're at time. I know we've had Ann speak before. She's amazing and wonderful. I'm sorry, Ann.
And we'll have Ann speak again, and we will test her audio in advance to make sure we get that all working. And Ann, if you want to share any thoughts, either in the comments or anything else, we can make sure we post those with the recording. About what we can answer Katie's question with your words.
Great. Okay. Well, we're okay to wrap up, Izzy?
Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you so much, Edgardo. I know you have a lot going on in your personal life right now, so it's really wonderful that you still gave us an hour of your time. It's quite kind of you. And thanks everyone who got on, especially Ann. I'm sorry again. Please go to secureourvote.us and sign up if you haven't. Use our resources, give us feedback so we can do better. Thank you all. Keep up the great work. Stick with it. We need you. We can win at least security in a bunch of the counties you're in this year, if not most of them. Bye-bye.